With us on the studio line and returning to the show, Ashok Gangadine. He is professor and chair of philosophy at Haverford College and the founder and director of the Global Dialogue Institute. His books include Between Worlds, The Emergence of Global Reason, Meditative Reason Toward Universal Grammar, and most recently, what's in front of me here, Meditations of Global First Philosophy, Quest for the Missing Grammar of Logos. We will discuss that book today. Also, Ashok is once again participating at the annual International Language of Spirit Conference in Albuquerque. That's the 12th annual coming up this weekend. And you can visit with Ashok and 24 plus other scientists, visionaries, educators, and indigenous elders coming together to dialogue. Details on how to attend will follow. First, Ashok, welcome back to the show. It's always fun talking with you on the air.
Well, thank you so much. Pleasure to be with you again.
So, global dialogue, global consciousness, common languaging, and your book title, Global Meditations of Global First Philosophy, all point to a universal coming together in a new way. And in your new book, the prescript section, there's prefaces now, there's a prescript. You'll have to explain what that is. You speak in the prescript of a one truth so powerful that we need to address it as our human evolutionary crisis remedy. You call that truth logos. So explain logos and what where we're heading in terms of this truth that we need to all realize.
Well, yeah, that's a great invitational opening question.
It gives you a lot of room. I'm just going to relax now.
Yeah, well, let me give you a sense of what I call the prescript, because I've been a philosopher, as you indicated. I've been teaching it for 42 years. Came here in '68 as a logician ontologist, deeply steeped in the Western tradition of analytic philosophy, before going to India in 1971 for the first time. I was born in Trinidad, you may recall, and lived in Jamaica as a boy and came to New York, and so New York was home growing up, and family originated in India, but I hadn't been to India, and I went for the first time in '71, 3 years after being at Haverford College, in a crisis in my philosophical research, finding a deep split in logic and not understanding any guidance from philosophy as to how do we cross worlds. Really, if you're, say, in the Judeo-Christian mind space and culture, can you really enter the Chinese mind? Can you enter the world of the Buddha? Can you enter the world of the Vedic tradition and teaching of Hindu thought, for example? And I had no guidance about crossing mind spaces and what were the transformational laws. Are there any logical rules to help us cross authentically across worlds? So that was my early beginnings. And just to go fast forward over 3-4 decades after I encountered Indian philosophy for the first time while I was a visiting professor at Pune, University of Pune, it changed my world, because I realized that meditative intelligence and the teachings of Buddha and the teachings of Krishna and the Gita and all the Vedic tradition that is based upon meditative intelligence opens up a deeper space than I ever knew in my education for what rationality and intelligence is all about. So that put my course, my life work, in trying to understand, are we missing a deeper grammar than we realize on the global scale? Started to go across cultures and worlds to understand, the different worlds and how do we cross them, and is there a logic for that? That's really all my books leading up to the one before you now. Meditations of Global First Philosophy. I didn't say on, but I said of.
Yes, explain that. And meditation is now certainly a more mainstream word, and you're bringing up a common era of 1970-71. That's when I started doing TM in Philadelphia at SmithKline, where actually the Transcendental Meditation people were doing corporate seminars then. And there's a paradigm shift when one starts to meditate. So what's the difference between meditations on and of as you speak?
Well, that's a good point. And that really is why this book, Meditations of Global First Philosophy, is really seeking to open a whole new frontier of philosophy on the planet. And the word "of" is that when you're in meditation, you are within the field. You're in, if it's working, you are moving out of the ego space, the ego mind that has dominated the planet. Ego-based consciousness talks about. It projects a screen of awareness, and you talk about things, and you are one of the objects on the screen of your awareness. I'm Ashok, I'm a professor, I'm an American, and have all my predications and everything all my world in ego script is being articulated as if it's on a screen, even my internal mental states, my sense of myself, and everything in my world is given a name and a place on that screen of objectified experience of ego-based thinking, and that's about. But when you go into meditation, you cross out of that. So the whole point is to let go of the ego-based way of being and enter into the Om field or the Buddha field or the unified field, whatever name you have for it. And then you are in flow. You're in the zone. You're in the Om space. And you are one. Buddha would say you're in emptiness and you're co-arising with everything in the holistic ecology. It's a different way of being human, a different level of experience.
Yeah.
And of course, people in ego-based cultures, which dominates the planet, really, because we seem to be stuck in this talking about things, aboutness. And Buddha saw that that was a source of suffering, because if you objectify yourself and other people and the world, if you reify it and make it an object, which you do automatically in ego-based consciousness, you're following the law of identity. Everything has its identity. One word, one meaning, and that identity, and you do that to yourself. And Buddha saw that if you do that and reify yourself, objectify yourself as an entity, you're going to suffer. That's the first noble truth. Ego existence is suffering. It has a cause, the attachment to the ego identity. And the third noble truth is we have a choice. We don't have to be addicted to that pattern. And the fourth noble truth is we can rehabilitate our mind into the meditative patterns of crossing into emptiness, into the Buddha space, where you come to life and you flow in compassion, where everything is co-arising. And physicists are calling it fractal or quantum or the holographic field, whatever name you use, where everything is interactive. That's a different calculus of living.
Yeah.
So what I found in my books and the one before you, meditations of first philosophy. The word first philosophy goes back, all of our traditions have it. Aristotle, in a way, baptized that word by saying that first philosophy is the philosophy of what is first. And being is the fundamental word, the ultimate concept, because everything else presupposes being. So if you could have a philosophy of being, and of course in the Greek the word logos is the word for the fundamental reality, the field of speech, of language, of meaning, of reason, of all of these good words, of profound words, are coming out of the logos. So the L word is inscribed in our whole European tradition. Every science is of the logos, psychology, philosophy, so the logos word is when you make it a science because you're getting into the light of the mind, of reason. So that's a Greek word, logos. But if you go into the Tao, the Chinese attempt at first philosophy, again, to get at what is primal and first, is the Tao. And Lao Tzu begins the Tao that is named, meaning in ego script, is not the Tao. Which is a warning label that if you're going to enter the Tao, you can't talk about it, you can't name it in ego script, you've got to go into the Tao. And that's the same with the Om. The Om in meditative science, of the yoga science, and say in the Gita and the Vedas, Krishna is trying to teach Arjuna that if you are broken down, buddy, on the battlefield with your family, because you're an ego-based warrior and you have your ego identity, and that's always going to polarize and split and lead to war and divisiveness and violence. And let me teach you the way to be a true warrior. And you've got to use yoga science to go into the Om space where you let go of the ego and sacrifice the ego, burn it off, that karma, and rise into the high awakened space of the Atman.
Yeah.
Then you become a liberated warrior. That's a whole course of the Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah, it's it's really good to hear this coming from you as a philosophy professor, and this material being able to be taught, at least at Haverford College. I'm wondering, looking ahead at the future, how much more of this material, as you speak, needs to be integrated into a more conventional educational program, as much as it can be spoken to guide students so that they can start to enter the space and live it as you
Absolutely.
speak.
Beautiful question. That's exactly what my life work at Haverford has been. Haverford was founded by the Quakers.
Didn't know that. I didn't know that.
Yeah. It was founded by the Quakers, and it's amazing. The more I lived here and discovered my affinity of the Quaker way, I really find that I am a friend. I really am Quakerly in the sense that the Quakers were Christian mystics who got it. They got it in their own tradition that it's not what's written in the book or on the page or on the walls and the icons of the church or in the minister or the priest or the rabbi or anyone to mediate between you and God. It is your heart and mind that has a direct link to the infinite presence.
Uh-huh.
That's the Quaker move, and therefore we are that script. We have to sit together, clear the walls, open the space, sit facing each other in silence, in shared silence. That's like the Om space, or the Shunyata emptiness, or the Zen space. Quakers got it. So that's the heritage of Haverford, but I think we've lost it to the ego-based academy, which talks about things.
Yeah.
So the title of my book, Meditations of, is trying to use that preposition to suggest a major shift, that when you're in the meditative intelligence, you are in the field.
Yes. Let's do this, Ashok. We're going to take our first break here in an ongoing serialized conversation. I do want to give out information, first of all, for Ashok's website, awakeningmind.org. But also, you get a chance to meet him and 24/6 plus people who are going to be dialoguing. I know you're going to input this into the circle. You've been there before at the 12th Annual International Conference of Spirit, Language of Spirit Conference. To register, you can go to seedgraduateinstitute.org, or you can call 505-792-2900. We'll return and talk more. We have returned. On the line with us Ashok Gangadine. I gave a long intro in the last segment. Professor and head of the philosophy department of Haverford College, and we left off. We were talking about Haverford as a originating as a friend school, Quaker school, and you were saying you were a friend, and you related to some of the spirituality or even religiosity of that organization, but the question that preceded that, or the discussion point that preceded that, was about educating people all over. I'm so happy you're doing it at a college outside of Philadelphia, but how do we get this into the curriculums without getting into a battle with the religious extremists, whether it's conservative or right? This is so important because, as you point out later in the book, that this has been the disaster creation point, if you know what I mean. So
absolutely,
I'm going to throw it to you.
All right. Again, a great question to pick up on that. I didn't want to lose that because my educational work here at Haverford over the last 4 decades. When I returned from India in 1971, remember I came here as a logician in '68. Analytic philosophy out of the Anglo-American tradition. You can't get more rigorous and precise than that. I was not trained in Indian philosophy. When I came back from India in '72, the crisis of diversity broke out at Haverford, which is an amazing moment when the African-American students occupied the president's office. They were feeling estranged and alienated on campus, and ABC News is on campus with the kind of shutdown of the institution. Is there racism at Quaker Haverford when the Quakers were the leaders of the underground movement? What's going on? And the only one that would speak to the African-American students was Gangadine. They asked me to come in to the president's office because they felt I would hear their concern about different worlds. They felt in a different reality here. And they felt I could help translate that, between worlds. And so that's when I came back, and I started to teach Indian philosophy after that. That was media. I don't want to get into that. But when I started teaching Indian philosophy, the department was a bit rattled about it because they were Western, completely European-oriented as real philosophy. And I had to introduce Indian, the Bhagavad Gita, Hindu thought and Buddhist thought, and to me it was radical critique of everything I did in philosophy. Because if you did Buddha's philosophy and you got into the great dialectician Nagarjuna, who really showed that ego identity breaks everything apart, and he demonstrated it in a magnificent way, in the highest pure logic. And I began to teach that here as a logician. And it rattled everything around me to start introducing these philosophers of India. And it caused me to realize, my God, I can't teach in the way I've been teaching before, because I was teaching about. I was teaching the academic mode of talking about it, about the Gita, about Buddha, about the Four Noble Truths, and I realized I was violating everything important in their teaching, because they were saying that don't talk about. Instead, enter into the Om's field. If you're going to go into the Gita and you want to understand it rigorously, which we do, and you want to understand Krishna's teaching to Arjuna, you can't stay in the ego space and teach it, because the whole point was the ego space is causing the problem. You got to go into the Om space.
Now let me ask you about that. As a practitioner, as a longtime meditator, as somebody who, we were neighbors at one time. I was in Philadelphia until 1977 at SmithKline, and did meditation in 1970. This need to be in that space, which the only way I know is to get quiet, and at least then you can start to observe the ego mind as the thoughts run through, almost like a teletype in front of your eyes, or you listen to it. Can we, from that space, individually and collectively, Ashok, create a way that we operate from that deep sense, preceding the word, so that we can come forward and then have an understanding, because our language, unfortunately, is still a dialogue and verbal, if you know what I mean. There's a grammar.
That's exactly where I had to innovate, because as a philosopher of language, logic and language is the field I was trained in. Philosophy of Wittgenstein, early Wittgenstein, later Wittgenstein, Bertrand Russell, Quine, all of the analytic philosophers of language. That was my whole field of my dissertation and so forth. So I realized that I had to find a way to mark when Krishna is speaking or Buddha is speaking from the meditative intelligence. They were speaking from a different dimension. They were using a different language game, a different script. And the key to helping our students understand when Arjuna speaks from the ego sphere, the ego script, and Krishna speaks from the Om script, they're speaking different dimensions. So I had to bring it out in the classroom to help the students gain the literacy of crossing from the ego script into the Om script, or from the ego script into Buddha's language, if we're going to study the text rigorously. So I introduced, after several years of experimenting and seeing that I had to renovate the space of teaching, and in a way that even though in an ashram or a meditational space you go in silence and you sit silently, and that's one form of meditation, as a philosopher in a rigorous academic setting, and I wanted to have the highest rigor academically, how do you speak, how do you converse and dialogue in the classroom in a way that didn't beg all the questions about the text and put it in the ego box?
Yes.
That's what I had to do. I had to invent a different way to have creative, meditative dialogue in the class, just as Krishna is having a meditative dialogue with Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. So I had, and Buddha is having that with his disciples as he taught them. Then I began to see Jesus was doing that, because Jesus was speaking from the Christ voice. And the disciples were in the ego space. And they didn't get what he was saying. That's why he said, for those who have ears, let them hear. And when he said, unless you die, you can't be born again. And the disciples were struggling from the ears. So, what, you mean we have to enter our mother's womb? He said, no, you don't. When I was in prison, you visited, all of the ways Jesus spoke, that was the new covenant. He was trying to upscript his hearers to enter into the Christ consciousness and the Christ voice, and to cross from that separated sin space of separation and fragmentation. What I began to see then, Alan, is that these great teachers across the planet were all speaking from this higher script. It wasn't just Krishna or Buddha. It was Jesus. It was Descartes in the Meditations. When Descartes was meditating and he broke the ego barrier and he got scared and he says, I am. What am I? I don't know, but that I am is certain.
Yeah.
He crossed into the meditative script.
Yes.
And all of the scholars pull him right back into the ego box to talk about it. Remember, the subtitle of Descartes' Meditations was Meditations on First Philosophy. My title is Meditations of Global First Philosophy. So back to the original question, without forgetting about reinventing teaching.
Yes.
How do you teach in an academic setting authentically and to people at large to help get this higher intelligence that all of our great teachers across the planet are trying to help us make this dimensional upscript to a higher mind operating process, a higher power of language that's the key to entering the unified field. And not to be in the broken, alienating, ego-based culture and language that is going to produce 9/11s and Holocausts and genocides and divorces and breakdown of families and breakdown across borders of language. That's the big question on the planet, and that's what I'm addressing in my book, Meditations of Global First Philosophy.
You know, there is so much we can speak around this. I want to read something relevant here, and actually a couple of things. I want to read something relevant here. You say, when the diverse cultural, religious, and philosophical traditions are rightly placed in the evolutionary drama of logos, their higher global significance is released, and we begin to see their common diagnosis that egocentric thinking is a human disaster. Now, you just said that kindly. I'm going to the the more dramatic portrayal of where we are right now because of egocentricity. I mean, this has to change. Otherwise, we're doomed. I mean, would you say it's that much of a crisis?
It is that much. It is a catastrophe. And in other words, a continued dominance of ego-based mental processes and cultures, despite the warnings and teachings and diagnostic of our greatest teachers on the planet for centuries and millennia, warning us that it creates crises, it fragments, it breaks, we can't flourish, it's pre-human, it's not human. We're not ego sapiens. We're logo sapiens. You know, that sums up all the teachings. I mean, if that's a Quaker tradition capturing Jesus' Christ consciousness. I mean, it's not ego-based.
Yeah.
And so yeah, this is. I'm not understating it, because the opening line of the book that you referred to, that I said there's one truth so powerful, meaning the presence of logos, that if we have the courage to face it, would change us forever. That logos is real. Logos understood in this high script. I use double parentheses to mark when we're in the logosphere, in the logos space, and single parentheses, almost because this is so important to know when we're in the ego script and what the consequences are, and when we cross into the dimension of the holistic field of real scripture, double brackets. I use double parentheses to mark the place of Buddha or Jesus or Descartes when he crossed into the I am. You know, and I think Abraham is struggling with this, and Moses is bringing the law in the dialogue with God, who says, I am that I am. They're all trying to get us to upscript to this double bracket space.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting. As you speak, Ashok, I can shut my eyes and I can move. Even though I'm hearing the words, I can move into the vibrational quality, call it whatever, the life force, quantum field, spirit. So I can hear that while I'm in that vibration or close to it as I come back out to speak with you. This is the real challenge. As you know, as a meditator knows, one can sit for 20 minutes, a half hour, or 45 minutes, an hour in the morning as a practice, and then needs to get up and move the legs and make the food and do the chop wood, carry water things of karma yoga, and still hold that space for as long as you can.
24/7. We're born for that. That's what our great teachers are saying. That's what Zen is all about. Be present here now.
Yeah, yeah.
Come to be. That's where we become flourishing humans.
But you also point out that there's a counterforce. That's the word you use. That was also in the prescript, and I didn't get into it in the book. But that it is the pervasive and potent influence of this counterforce in human evolution that makes it so difficult to realize the truth of logos, and that has produced suffering and devastation in the human condition. You want to talk about the counterforce? I mean, dark energies, conspiracy theories. I mean,
no, I don't want to go there.
Okay.
I don't want to go there because the best of us, the best of our everyday people, are good and well-intentioned, good people who are still some unintentionally, perhaps unwittingly, caught in the ego-based calculus, the ego-based mind operating process. Despite the warnings of our teachers. I mean, so again, Buddha's great Four Noble Truths are really, if you just strip it down, is ego is suffering. The cause is clinging to the ego. We don't have to be addicted that way. We can rehabilitate our minds so that chop wood, carry water, mindful living of compassion.
Okay.
And so that's just the Buddha's version. Krishna has a different, Jesus has a different. It's all through the traditions.
All right, let's take a break here, another break, okay? I want to give out information. Check out Ashok's website. Ashok Gangadine is at awakeningmind.org, and you are invited to visit with him and a dozen plus other visionaries who are coming together, again, for the 12th Annual International Language of Spirit Conference. You can register for that at seedgraduateinstitute.org. It's next weekend. There's still time. Or you can call 505-792-2900. I want to continue our conversation, though, with Ashok on the book Meditations of Global First Philosophy, Quest for the Missing Grammar of Logos. And we shall do that. All right, with us on the studio line, Ashok Gangadine. We have been talking about various principles of logos out of Meditations of Global First Philosophy, and we brought up the difficulty of staying in a space that is beyond verbal, I guess, in some ways, and that is egocentric or mind-oriented. I'm using the word mind, and you do use global mind in a way too. So maybe you could address this difficulty of stepping out of this incredible space that one can get into with meditation or silence or a metaphysical experience or a supernatural experience. All these, a miracle, these things that happen to us all of a sudden project us into our true nature of self or presence. That, as you were saying, all these teachers, Buddha, Christ, Muhammad, and other people who are less known have been in that space. So how do we do that as a collective society? Because I'll sign on to the agenda, bro.
Well, to not lose then that important point, that I've been trying to say, that when you really step back from any particular one tradition, start to scan what's been going on by our great teachers, men and women through the ages, you see a remarkable, astounding diagnostic in different fonts and different dialects, but they really are getting at the same. That's the whole point of Meditations of Global First Philosophy. So there's a global script that's across borders, that Jesus is inaugurating, and he's saying that Abraham and Moses were opening the way, and the great prophets. I mean, he's not saying it new, because if you understood Abraham's struggle regarding Isaac, for example, when God calls, Yahweh calls out, "Hear, O Israel, your Lord thy God is one. Love me with all your heart, mind, and soul." That was saying, put the first, and not your ego agenda, folks. That, and his love of Isaac, his son, was a metaphor for his own ego agenda, and his struggle was a global struggle of Abraham that launched Judaic spirituality. Was, do I listen to God and place the Logos first, Yahweh the first, the infinite first, and love it and to honor it? So that is a basic axiom of all the planet. What is first? Place first and honor first. What that means is you can't put your ego agenda first. You can't put your ego lens first. You got to let it go. And all of the great traditions say is the sacrifice of letting go of your ego, your Isaac, your agenda, and surrender to Islam, surrender to God, surrender to Allah, surrender to what is higher. That's the axiom of reality. Thou shalt honor first. What is first? first things first. And the script and that shift from ego-based consciousness to that logosphere is so profound that the language, the dimensional shift needs to be honored. And that's why I introduced about 20 years ago, I was forced to do it as a teacher. I said, we've got to find a way to mark out into the open when we're in the ego script. Let's use single strokes as quotes, ego quotes, to own it, and double parentheses to mark when we make the dimensional shift into the logosphere, the Sophia sphere, into the space of Om, Tao, Yahweh, Allah, Christ, primal unified field of science, whatever you name it. Use double scripts to mark the fractal quantum field. So what you are pointing out is that the planet urgently needs to bring this, civilize this script and bring it out into our cultures so that we can live in this mindful way as compassionate, mature human beings. That is really the challenge, and that's what the book is trying to bring out.
Yeah, maybe we can look at these times of great polarization, sometimes I think intentionally perpetrated because it keeps people separated. It's a strategy of war, divide and conquer is a cliche, and there are forces that would want to see us stay in separation, all this stuff that goes on in the media and talk shows and left and right and red and blue and all that. So you're talking about you use the word dialogical encounter as an awakening model. How do we integrate that? How can...
Well, good. And my institute, Global Dialogue Institute, was developed over 15 years ago to try and help people understand the skills of deep dialogue.
Uh-huh.
What we call dialogue in ordinary conversation, which is a single bracket, is, say a Christian is going to dialogue with a Muslim or a Hindu or a Buddhist or whatever, and he or she, in this case, let's say the Christian, is using her lens to see the other. And the Buddhist is speaking, and you understand, well, you're not in Christ, and you're not going to be saved, but I'll listen to you, and so forth. You're interpreting through your lens. We all do that. We all have a mind lens of our culture, of our worldview, and we interpret the other through that. That is not dialogue, that's a monologue. Ego-log is not dialogue. The word dialogue means dialogos, through the logos. So to really dialogue, you've got to have the courage to step back from privileging your lens. This is the Abraham struggle, and to open up and dare to enter into the mind space of the other, to allow the other to speak in her own terms. And that's deep dialogue. And the dialogue mind, that opens up to the logos. That's when you become human. And all of the great teachers saw that's moral consciousness. When you see in the I-thou space, it's different from the I-it space, to use Buber's way of thinking. When I it you, Alan, I treat you as an object, I don't even realize I'm objectifying you through my lens. I'm violating your otherness.
Yeah.
And that's a violent act, and it's just so commonplace. That's a catastrophe. We haven't seen that even with good intentions, I objectify my lover, and I know that she's the greatest thing that ever happened to me, but she's a thing, she's an object, and I don't realize unintentionally I've objectified her. I've objectified myself because I'm as a subject, I process myself in that ego box, and I'm violating my sanctity as a sacred being, and I'm doing that with everyone, with my kids, with nature, with everything around me. And so to be an I-thou being requires that we open up to this double bracket sacred space in which I stand before the work of art. If I'm going to the museum to see a Van Gogh, and I'm going there with the ego mind and ego lens and ego eyes, and I know it's a valuable $3 million pay, and I want to stand in front of it, and all the people are crowding around, and I'm chattering in that ego lens, that object on the wall. That's a different experience than showing up in the museum, opening in this meditative, sacred, open space to allow the work of art to speak to me in its terms, show itself. That's an I-thou moment. With nature, with other people, with our kids, with everyone. When we start to live in that open, mindful space, a Christ space, that's when we're nonviolent. That's when we're human. That's when we're scientists. I can hear the phenomena. I don't have to use my Newton lens or my Einstein lens or realize I've got a lens, a theoretical framework I'm imposing on the phenomena before me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So if I can, it affects every aspect of our culture.
Yeah. Well, one needs to understand that in the quantum field, there's almost a need to disidentify with the ego mind that has been accumulated this lifetime, or maybe even karmically or genetically. This stuff is passed on. And I know from my experience of mystical experiences, there is that place where you come to maybe a realization that you're nothing. I mean, maybe this is the Zen void, and that can bring up your fears and anxieties, because if I'm not my ego, can I stay in this space of nothingness and still survive on the planet while everybody else is something? You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, that's exactly the point of literacy, because, and that's a scary point that all the great teachers saying.
Yeah.
Krishna is facing that with Arjuna. Says, Arjuna, don't be afraid. In this yogic awakening and transformation, even though you're going to burn off the karma of your ego identity as an older former warrior, which is samsara. Samsara is that condition of being caught in the ego sphere. And to go into the Om sphere, you've got to let it go. That's a rite of passage. Don't be afraid. You know, because Buddha's vocabulary for that awakened space is shunyata, or emptiness, as you point out. And when you drop somethingness, since the whole diagnostic problem is that when you make yourself a thing, you are not a thing, you're a no thing. But that scares us, because if you only speak the thing language, then the alternative to awakening and to being fluid and flowing and surfing in the moment, your body is greater than ever. Your body is awakened in the mindful space. It's not that you don't have a body, you just don't have a mind.
Yeah.
You don't have an objectified, fixated entity.
Yeah.
Carrying around, but now you are an awakened person. You are totally, surfing the logosphere, the Buddha sphere at that point, and that's what mindful Zen is about. So that's what athletes might call that being in the zone. When I have athletes in my class, and I say to them, "Have you ever been in the zone on the soccer field?" When that magic moment happens, and you're not ego soccer, but you as a team click in a beautiful jazz improv moment, that it's got to be Miller time after that, They get it. I have a lot of athletes in my class, because they know being in the zone is real, and they want to live there.
Yeah. I've said something over the last 3 years that a teacher brought in, and somebody was on the radio show who I really loved, that because he was also a scientist, a physicist, saying when you get right down to who we are in the world of science, we're space. We're 99.9% space. That's the difference between the atom and the first electron circling the atom, the nucleus in the atom, and so. But we're so identified with the form, or the mind of the form, and if we could just play in the space a little bit, the consciousness a little bit, that would provide a foreground of our understanding, if you know what I mean.
Oh, absolutely. I think the frontier of physics is brilliantly converging with the logosphere, the Buddha sphere, the Christ sphere, what these great teachers experienced in that laboratory, to know non-locality and the butterfly effect. I playfully distinguish between the ego sapien as an adolescent form of the human, like the caterpillar, with the imaginal cells transforming it into a butterfly. I use the analogy when you go from a single bracket ego sphere as an ego pillar to the awakened space of becoming a blossomed Buddha fly. That really is the analog from the caterpillar to the butterfly.
Yes.
From an ego pillar. We're not ego sapiens, we're logo sapiens. That's the basic message of all our teachers.
Yeah, this is great. Well, it's always fun talking with you, and look forward to having maybe some hangout time with you here in town in Albuquerque.
So you'll be there, huh? You'll be there.
I am coming down for that Friday evening reception. So, and then I go into production for my show on Saturday and Sunday. But will you be there on that Friday?
Well, I hope so. Yes. I'm coming in on the 14th.
All right.
I don't know if that's
no,
Friday.
That's Saturday. I think you.
Okay. I'm coming in on the 14th.
All right. Well, I may miss you, but it's always fun talking with you.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for hosting this, and your questions are great. Thank you so much.
Okay.